Welcome to session T6, which is International Reactor Deployment Approaches. Hopefully everyone's in the right session. I'm going to run through a few housekeeping notes, and then I'll introduce our amazing panel that we have for today. First, please silence your electronic devices if you haven't already. Also, if you need Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi code is RIC 2026. And that's an important thing to remember because the Q&A for this is all going to be done via QR code. So for those of you in the room, if you want to ask questions, please feel free to ask questions throughout the course of the presentation by scanning the QR code. We won't answer the questions until the end to make sure everyone has time to get through their presentations. If you are online, there should be a box to the right of your screen that has a tab for Q&As, and they all go into the same queue, and so we will get to questions at the end. All right, that's it for the basics. I'm going to first just give quick introductions to all the panelists, and then I'm going to introduce them in order in which they're going to present. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Jody Martin. I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of International Programs here at the NRC. I just began this job pretty recently, and I'm excited to be here and to meet a lot of our international colleagues for the first time. Previous 2 years, I was the Associate Director for Operations in our EDO's office, Executive Director for Operations office, where I got to focus a lot on implementing the new Executive Orders and Advance Act. And so it was a good experience, and now I'm excited to come over here. I've been at the NRC for about 20 years. I'm an attorney by background, so most of my time was in the Office of General Counsel, doing a lot of new and advanced reactor work from the legal side. First up is going to be Mr. Mike Finnerty, sitting here to my left. Mike is the Chief Executive and Chief Nuclear Inspector of the United Kingdom's Office of Nuclear Regulation, ONR, and he took that position last summertime. He has over 30 years of experience in the UK's civil and defense nuclear industry. Mike began his career as a nuclear safety analyst. He first joined ONR in 2003 as a nuclear safety inspector, specializing in criticality safety assessments. And since then, he's worked his way up through ONR, and then most recently he was a special assistant to DG Grossi at the IAEA, where he advised on nuclear safety matters in Ukraine, and also was one of the architects of one of the IAEA's new flagship projects, Atlas, which is looking at peaceful maritime applications in nuclear power. So we're happy Mike can join us. Thank you. After Mike, we'll have a virtual presentation from South Korea. We have Miss Insuk Jang, and thank you for joining us from South Korea because it is very early in the morning tomorrow, I believe, in South Korea right now. So we appreciate very much you taking the time to join us. Ms. Jang is the Director of Advanced Nuclear Reactor Safety Division at the Nuclear Safety and Security Commission, NSSC, of the Republic of Korea. She is responsible for overseeing safety regulation for advanced and small modular reactors in Korea. She has 20 years of government experience at the Ministry of Science and Technology, the Presidential Office, and the Embassy of India. Previously, she also served at the IAEA. She was a senior safety expert from 2021 to 2025, supporting member states in establishing their nuclear regulatory infrastructure. So welcome, Ms. Jang. Next up, we have Mr. Andrzej Glowacki. He's the president of the National Atomic Energy Agency of Poland, PAA, a job he's had since March of 2023. Andrzej has spent more than 18 years at the PAA. He's been the vice president and the director of the Nuclear Safety and Security Department. And Andrzej has also spent some time seconded to the NRC during construction oversight of Vogel, as well as the commissioning of Wattspar Unit 2. He's also participated in IRS mission to Canada, and he is one of the authors of the IAEA Handbook on Regulatory Inspectors of Nuclear Power Plants. Welcome, welcome, Andrzej. Yep. Next up, we have Dr. Marco Brugmans. He is the vice chair of the board of the Authority for Nuclear Safety and Radiation Protection of the Netherlands. Marco is also a vice chair of the European Nuclear Safety Regulators Group, INSREG, and he's chair of its SMR task force. So Marco will today provide remarks both on some of the Netherlands approaches to advanced reactors and also give us the INSREG approach. Dr. Brugmans has an academic background in radiation protection, and he has a PhD in experimental physics. So welcome, Marco. And finally, we have Ms. Anna Bradford. Anna is the Director of the Division of Nuclear Installation Safety at the IAEA. She is responsible for safety infrastructure and safety improvement during all phases from site evaluation to operation. Prior to the IAEA, Anna worked here at the NRC since 2000, including senior roles in new reactor licensing. And I'm very happy and pleased to welcome Anna back to the NRC as the Director of our Office of Nuclear Reactor Regulation in a few months here. So welcome back, Anna, and thank you for participating today. With that, I'm going to just do a quick little setting of the scene before turning it over to our panelists for their presentations. So this topic, as you see, is on advanced reactor deployment. The NRC has a lot going on in this area. If you've listened to the plenaries this morning, you heard a lot of the highlights of what the NRC is doing. We're not going to spend as much time on the NRC's approach in this panel. We really want to hear from our international colleagues. If you are interested in what the NRC is doing, more information on that can be found on at different RIC sessions. RIC session T1, One Government, One Mission, Advancing Safe Deployment in Nuclear Energy. Session W8, Building Smarter, Accelerated Advanced Reactor Construction. Session W11, Efficiency in Motion, NRC's Cross-Cutting Licensing Progress. And then session W12 is Enabling the Safe and Timely Deployment of Microreactors, Meeting Critical U.S. Needs Through Innovation and Regulatory Readiness. So I encourage you all to look at those sessions, and you can hear more about what the NRC is doing, and I'm sure it will pop up throughout other plenaries and other sessions throughout the RIC as well. So because we want to hear more from our international colleagues, we're just going to move right ahead, and I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Excellent. Thanks, Jody. And well, good afternoon, everyone. So for me, I know this talk is about advanced reactor deployment. For me, I'd really like to touch on actually how we as an organization are changing, because without question, I think in the UK, we are seeing a nuclear renaissance now. I was saying to someone the other day, this actually is my third renaissance that I've seen. But I think this is real this time. And it's not just advanced reactors that we are seeing in the UK. We also have ONR is also responsible for regulation of defense sector, and also decommissioning. We have a huge portfolio for decommissioning. So when I came back to ONR in this role in July of last year, first and foremost in my mind was how do we set ourselves up to deal with these challenges ahead? Because without question, I think what we're seeing in the UK, this represents a change that we haven't seen for decades. I think in the UK, I think we have had a significant nuclear industry, but it has been pretty stable for probably 40 years. The next 5 years will change dramatically, including advanced reactor deployment, and I'll talk a little bit about how some of the approaches we are taking for advanced reactors. But also, as I said, for defense and for decommissioning. So for me, right on my radar was how do we change? And I think I had two real opportunities for me to grasp, really. The first one was I came into a period where we were about to renew our strategy, how we operate. And for me, this was a case of there were some real drivers for what our strategy should address. I've talked about the huge amount of work that we had, a really, really large portfolio. But it's not just the size of the portfolio. There's a real urgency, and I think this is particularly the case from the new reactor vendors and developers. They've looked at the UK and said, well, actually, is this really a place where you can accelerate projects? And it was clear that if we were to bring projects to market, we had to really respond, promptly, really efficiently, really effectively to be able to regulate these projects and help bring them to market. There would also be a clear kind of scrutiny of us. I know I've heard this from a number of fellow regulators about the scrutiny that they are under as well. We're exactly the same, in terms of our finances, in terms of actually we need to be much more efficient and much more effective as regulators. So these were the real challenges that I had. And for me, not to change wasn't an option. I think the change is so significant, we had to change as an organisation. So I developed 3 themes, really, and these will be brought out in our strategy. Our strategy will be published, hopefully, in the springtime. It's very nearly there. But the first theme was really about modernising. We had to modernise as an organisation, and this was both from a technology point of view, in terms of looking externally at the technologies that were coming along, to be able to really understand exactly what these technologies look like, and be able to, to assess things like how artificial intelligence was being used in to develop safety cases, how new systems were involved, say control and instrumentation, for example, in new reactor technologies, things like this. But also actually modernising internally as well, to be able to be a much more techno-savvy organisation, I guess, and be able to use that technology so that we can actually use it much more efficiently to be able to respond to developers. But also culturally as well. I think, for me as a modern regulator, I think it's important that we operate in a way that we can actually understand what the strategic landscape is telling us. We have a clear role that, if government wants new nuclear power stations, then as a regulator, we have to be able to take that on board and be able to regulate in a way that really looks at outcomes. The outcomes are, if government wants nuclear power stations, then actually we need to take that enabling approach to be able to deliver these. So that was a key theme as part of our strategy. The other thing was about us being more agile as well. I think, we look forward, and the amount of work that we have, it is huge. But we don't actually know what the sequencing will look like. We don't actually know when new reactor projects will come to O&R and what our assessment timelines look like. So we have to be agile as an organisation so that we can put the resource and the effort exactly where it is needed. And to do that, we really need to build that capability of our organisation as well. So we do have resources that can actually move and be really flexible, to be able to assess a really wide portfolio of activity. The third theme is really for us to be more productive. We have to be able to deliver promptly and quickly. This doesn't compromise safety at all, but we need to actually understand as an organisation when good enough is good enough, to be able to take that fit-for-purpose approach so that we can turn around assessments in a really quick and speedy time. So they were the 3 themes that were developed, and I think these come out very clearly as part of our new strategy. However, just doing that on its own, that won't speed up anything. It was a case of, look, actually, what part does government play? What part does industry play? Unfortunately, there was another stream that really helped me kind of put this whole picture together. And this was because the government developed or instigated what it termed was a regulatory review, a task force that would look at the whole regulatory framework in the UK, because it felt that it was inefficient, it was too bureaucratic, etc. Very quickly, the task force was commenced early last year. And very quickly it came to the view that actually this is not all at the door of regulators. Actually, industry itself has a really key part to play, and so does government. And essentially the recommendations from the task force really looked at that whole system, that whole ecosystem, as I know Chairman Neves talked about this morning. That whole ecosystem needs to lift up its game, to improve its game, to be able to deliver new nuclear and other nuclear projects. This is not a change in the regulatory standards at all. Safety is absolutely not compromised. However, what the recommendations do point towards is how these standards are implemented and how they are interpreted. So, for example, as part of safety cases, we have one of our fundamental standards, it's called tolerability of risk and reducing risk, protecting people. This is a framework which essentially says what industry needs to do. It needs to address foreseeable accidents that have a significant consequence. But actually what we are seeing across the industry is, in terms of producing safety cases, is we have safety cases that are produced essentially for the regulator to anticipate any question that the regulators may act, anticipate any fault condition that might either feasibly or unfeasibly appear, and they are addressed. And what we are seeing huge safety cases that really are not quite fit for purpose. And so again, this is what the recommendations are looking towards. They're going back to industry and saying the industry must document safety cases that are fit for purpose, that address those foreseeable accidents, and say, and if they are present significant faults, significant consequences, how are they protected against? And if this doesn't happen, then essentially the whole system becomes bogged down. We see drag in the whole system that slows everything down. Also, as well as part of the recommendations, it looked at things like actually what the fit-for-purpose solutions look like. Again, ONR is an enabling regulator, and we've really encouraged industry not to, as we term it, gold-plate solutions, because we do see situations where the safety system is hugely complex, and again, this adds drag to the whole system. Instead, developers and industry itself must identify actually what does a fit-for-purpose solution really look like. And so this really, these kind of things, these recommendations that came out of the task force, one of the things that they did point to is it's a mindset, it's a cultural issue right across that whole system. So how do you change this mindset? How do you change this culture to be able to make this much more efficient process? The other thing that the task force is looking to address is there is a huge complexity in the regulatory system in the UK. For new build projects that come in, we see we are the nuclear safety regulator. We also have environmental regulators. We have planning regulators. And often these, they butt up against each other. And we sometimes see the repetition of assessments. So we see some activity that is repeated a number of times to satisfy different regulators. We see different timescales as well that are in place. And so it's really, so one of the things that the task force has recommended is actually to produce a commission that actually, and it wants a timescale for by the end of next year, that we set up a regulatory commission that will make a much more smoother, less complex process, so that when new reactor projects do come to the UK, actually the commission can sit and it can have a much more effective and efficient dialogue to be able to accelerate that regulatory process. I think the one thing that the government has said as part of this task force review is that it really wants it's a step change. And we heard Chairman Nee say this morning that this is a once-in-a-generation lifetime approach. This is what we're seeing. And we are putting in place these new arrangements specifically to address the challenges of new build, but also to address the other travel challenges that we've got in the UK. So this change, we've got a really ambitious timescale to deliver the changes. We're up for the challenge, but I think what's really important is we have to change. I think if we don't change this renaissance that I've said, this is a third one that I've seen, this won't be effective. I think we need to change and we're up for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Now we'll turn it over to Ms. Insuk Jang. Hopefully our virtual connection works well.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah.
Yes, it worked.
Yep, we hear you. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Okay. So I was expecting my presentation. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I am Insuk Jang, the Director of Advanced Reactor Safety Division at the NSSC. I'm very happy to share our experience and our strategic approach to regulating the next generation nuclear technology. So next, please. Okay, so my story is organized into 4 parts. First, I will overview the Korea's regulatory framework as a basis of our today's discussion. And then I will move to what we learned from our Smart 100 licensing process. And then I will look at our current effort to prepare ISMR standard design approval. And then finally, I will conclude with our future roadmap to build the SMR regulatory system. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, next. So this is the overview of Korea's regulatory framework. So we have a structured hierarchy of the legal system. So from the top, Nuclear Safety Act, and we go down till the specific technical standard, which is NSSC notice. So the upper three part is dealing with licensing categories and application procedures and required documentations, etc. And this NSSC rules part, we deal with design criteria and specific approval standards for design function, procedures, and etc. When we also use guideline and references. Next, please. So considering this, we have this structured hierarchical legal framework, which means we are aiming to balance between legal stability at the same time to have operational flexibility by delegating the specific provisions to the lower level the act. However, we have to examine ourselves whether it is effective to integrate these kind of technical innovations which are now SMR is providing to us. But our answer was maybe our regulatory system is not the best to accommodate this new regulatory demand, because our framework is primarily centered on large-scale LWRs and also for electricity generation. And it is written in prescriptive style, which means it dictates specific design solutions rather than the performance or the risks. So next, please. Okay, so I will move to what we learned from Smart 100. Next. So Smart 100 was a 110 megawatt integral type PWR SMR. It was our first real case of fully passive safety system. And it was applied for standard design approval in December 2019. And finally, in September 2024, the NSSC issued the approval. And during that process, the major regulatory issues were two, and then we had to organize subcommittees to review thoroughly about those two issues. And we will move to those two issues and how we solve the issues. Next, please. Okay. This was the mechanism of Smart 100's passive safety system. I will not elaborate all the details, but its mechanism relies on gravity and natural circulation. So, which means it was very novel design to Korean reviewers. So it required rigorous discussion among regulators and the developers. And also it needed a flexible interpretation of the current requirements. Next, please. The real challenge was the second one, the offsite power system. Our regulatory requirement, as I said, it dictates the specific design. So NSSC notice requires two physically independent offsite power systems. But the applicant's design features two offsite power systems which are not physically independent. They have their own vision. The key design feature of Smart 100, it was the key design feature. The Smart 100 was intended for deployment in remote areas such as the desert. So this is so important feature that the developer needed to keep. So the applicant's valuation of the safety grade DC power systems capability was accepted during the review. However, during the NSSC commissioners meeting, it required it required extensive discussion whether we can grant this exemption from the clear requirement. So even though the NSSC rule has the provision to allow the NSSC on its own judgment to grant the exemption. So we realize it is not easy to grant exemption case by case. Next, please. So what we learned, it was our first standard design application approval for a fully passive system. And we realized the limited experience and data regarding the reliability of the passive features were the major changes. So regulators need to enhance the tailored technical capability, focusing on those issues. And also, we realized new designs require extensive discussion, and that discussion is better to be started at the early stage of the design. And also, we found out that the existing large-scale LWR-based our framework is generally applicable to LWR-type SMRs if there are modifications and flexible interpretation is possible. And the other major lesson was under a prescriptive regulatory culture, which is Korea's one. Granting exemption from prescribed criteria remains a challenging decision. Next, please. So now I will move to our readiness for ISMR. This is the centerpiece of our current effort to regulate SMR. So let's move to. Okay. So this is key facts of ISMR. The one unit has 170 megawatt, and it is composed of 4 module type, and it is steel containment vessel, integral design. And one thing special is it is bottom free, and it is fully passive safety system designed with non-safety class power. So the primary design was led by KHNP, but later it was launched as a national R&D project supported by the ministries, and it had pre-application design review from 2023 to 2025, just last December, and it was applied for the SDA in February last month. Next, please. Then, in order to get ready for ISMR, I will introduce what we have done and what we are doing now. First, we did pre-licensing review, as I already mentioned. This is because the innovative safety design concept of ISMR, unlike Smart 100, pushes the existing regulatory frame further. Like we already saw, the Smart 100 approach relied primarily on flexible interpretation, but we realized ISMR's innovative design needs more vigorous approach from our side. So because we didn't have a statutory basis for pre-licensing review, we needed to conclude interagency MOUs, and also we created a national R&D project to secure the resources for the pre-licensing review. And the result was we reviewed 21 technical review reports from the developers, and we identified 9 major safety issues and 12 specific gap items. Next, please. The other one we did is to establish NSSC notice on alternative application of technical standards. This is from the lesson of Smart 100, because even though we have the provision of granting the exemption from the requirement, it was not easy to grant actually through the discussion. So we realized we need some procedure and requirements for applying alternatives to mandated criteria. So this was done in October last year. We also established regulatory R&D, especially dedicated to ISMR safety issues. Next, please. And also recently, it is just recent, from 2023, we started to create SMR dedicated regulatory governance, the organizations. First in 2023, my division, Advanced Reactor Safety Division, was created in NSSC. Later, in 2025, in our TSOs, KINS and KAINA, dedicated review teams were created. And also we established the SMR R&D Program Management Office to mainly focusing on managing technology development for SMR issues. And we also initiated the serial revisions of specific technical standards to accommodate these new designs. Next, please. Now, the story until now is about the LWR style SMRs, but the real challenges for us now is the different design as you expect. Next, please. These are the non-LWR designs currently in development in Korea. MSR, HTGL, SFR, all the different types of design, and also purposes, the marine propulsion, heat supply, power generation. And also I have to include two other designs. One is TerraPower Natrium from US, and one is Saltpos C MSR from Denmark. So we have these kind of new design and new purposes of reactors. So next, please. So what is challenges ahead of us? Like you saw, these various purposes and designs were not considered or incorporated into Korea's current NSA framework. For example, current reactor categorization in our law is only power generation or research and education. And also it is mainly for the large scale LWRs. And Mike also mentioned about the culture. Our culture, nuclear safety and regulatory culture, it is the existing system has been developed around the pre-structured set of requirements with a heavily prescriptive style. So we are very accustomed to judge whether this design is meeting the prescribed design criteria. This is the cultural issue. And also there is a limited statutory basis to reduce regulatory uncertainties. Like pre-licensing engagement, we don't have the legal basis. That's why we needed to conclude the interagency MOUs and create the R&D project. So this was another issue. And the other one, it is especially for the regulators, Korea's advanced nuclear technology and strong support of the government. The government is expecting the SMR is the future growth engine for Korea. So the recently SMR Promotion Special Act was became in effect. So it necessitates regulatory readiness at an expedited speed. But also at the same time, we have to be aware that we have to be independent. So this is the challenges we are now recognizing. So next, please. So roadmap for SMR regulatory system. So this is why we developed this roadmap. This is to provide regulatory predictability to the developers and also secure the necessary resources to build an optimal regulatory framework. So it was published in February 2026, which means just last month. So the final goal of this roadmap is to establish a regulatory framework covering the diverse purposes and designs, at the same time shifting the safety validation paradigm toward performance-based approach. And we are aiming to finalize this through 2030. There are three strategies. First one is we will apply our lessons learned and experience from previous cases, such as Smart 100 and ISMR. And we will ensure reliability through alignment with international standards and requirements. At the same time, it is very important partnership is very important with the developers. So we will try to enable concurrent development of safety standards through regulator-developer partnership. Next, please. So there are 3 major task categories we organized. The first one is phase the establishment of SMR regulatory framework, which means we have to initiate amendment of NSA from 2028 to finalize this framework in effect through 2030. So we have to expand the regulatory scope to accommodate diverse reactor design and various application purposes. And also through codifying alternative application provisions in law, we have to enhance legal certainty and regulatory transparency. At the same time, we are planning to promulgate technical standards for MSRs as an alternative rule, allowing applicants to opt in based on their technical features. And the direction of these technical standards for MSR is while we preserve structural consistency, considering our safety and regulatory culture, the requirements will be focused on performances rather than the design criteria to allow design-specific safety criteria and integrating. And also we want to integrate RIPB elements in these technical standards. Next, please. The second task is to build effective and efficient safety evaluation system. To do that, we will codify the pre-application review in our law so that the developers can apply for and get the earlier review and position from the regulators. We are expecting 3 developers are already expressing their willingness to apply for this procedure. And also, we will launch the design-specific working groups involving all stakeholders, which means including developers and regulators and also researchers. So to enhance technical competence and address anticipated regulatory issues. This is based on the strategy that we need partnership with the developers. And so we are planning to launch in April the 3 groups, SFR, MSR, and HTGL. Next, please. The last one is strengthening regulatory infrastructure and capability. Everybody understands that we have to, the regulator needs technical capability, so we need to review these various designs. So we will expand our SMR dedicated R&D and also dedicated organizations. And we also value the importance of the capability of safety reviewers and inspectors. So we will create the dedicated training programs for them. And also, we will continue to actively participate in IAEA and other international organization initiatives and bilateral cooperation. Korea is already actively participating in NHSI and SMR Regulatory Forum, and also we expressed our willingness to participate in Atlas. So, next. Yeah, this is it. This is all I prepared for today. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be happy if you have any question.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Ms. Jang. I'm going to hand it over now to Andrzej.
Dzień dobry, szanowni państwo. Miło, że zostałem zaproszony tutaj dzisiaj na ten panel. Dziękuję bardzo organizatorom. Rozumiem, że jest zapewnione symultaniczne tłumaczenie języka polskiego, nie? There is no simultaneous translation, no? No, unfortunately. So, good afternoon. I will try then in English. Thank you very much for having me today. It's a quite good attendance here, and I was listening our ONR colleague and Korean ones. These are two mature regulators and two mature countries with a mature program, nuclear program. Now I would like to give you some perspective from the newcomer country. And the title of this session is International Approaches to Advanced Reactor Deployment. And the title of my presentation is the preparation of PAA and Poland for the deployment of AP1000. And you can ask the question why he will be speaking about AP1000. Well, for a country like Poland, which operates only one research reactor from 1974, AP1000 is advanced technology. So I'm gonna give you some information about how we prepare to license this reactor. Please, next slide. That's the content of my presentation. I will give you some national perspective. I will give some information about the framework, the Polish nuclear power program. Secondly, I will speak about our approach to the capacity building, some information about pre-licensing, and how we prepare for the licensing, and of course some information about cooperation with some external partners. Next, please. And the next, so let's start. Well, that's the main document which we have, which direct us to the licensing, how we can, or how we should build our infrastructure. The Polish nuclear power program was developed actually in 2014, and it was updated in 2020, and we are now in the process of the next update. It's focus on the implementation of the first and the second nuclear power plant. It foresees that there will be 6 to 9 gigawatts electrical installed in Poland, and should consist, well, each NPP should consist of 2 to 3 units over 1,000 megawatt each. But also the documents give information about preparation of the regulatory authority, in this case PAA, and its tasks under this program. Next, please. Or no? Okay. So that's there are some key dates. Maybe it's not well visible, but we've been approaching the preparation for the licensing in terms of our staffing from 2020. We started our recruitment 2022. In 2023, you can see we've renewed our bilateral agreement with the US NRC, but at the same time, in 2022, AP1000 technology was selected for the first 3 units. There are some tasks on the operator side, which is on the left. That's a PJ, Polskie Elektrownie Jądrowe in Polish. Now we are about to receive the application for the construction license. Actually, what has been communicated to us, we should expect application for the construction license in a few weeks now. In Poland, the process consists of 3 steps: construction license, commissioning license, and operating license. And for the first step, we by law, as a PAA, we by law have 2 years to review and to issue the license. So if the submission will be good enough and will be received in 2026, within a few weeks, we should issue the license in 2028. But I'm saying the submission should be complete enough. If we will ask any additional questions to the application, then the clock stops for us. Next, please. Next. So in terms of capacity building, we started, as you can see on the right side, in 2020, there were 102 people in PAA, at the PAA, but the regulator oversees not only nuclear power, but also the use of radioactive sources, the other tasks. So 102 people. Nowadays, actually, there is over 180 people at the agency. The Nuclear Safety Department, which is the main department for the licensing of AP1000, they started from like 10, 15 people. Now they have over 50. But it does not mean we do not struggle issues and problems in hiring people. But we are trying to do our best to be ready and to have enough manpower to perform the review and assessment. There are really challenges, but we try to cooperate with universities to attract PEA for the newcomers. And of course, hiring process is one or first step. The second step is to train people. And you can see at the right hand on the bottom the man days of training in different years. So it's really, we are kind of constantly train our staff. Another thing which we are doing is try to retain the people who we hire, because we invest a lot. But then after a few years, if you are losing your people, that's a big issue. We've started our onboarding program quite recently, because we have seen that the first year at the organization is quite crucial. If people don't feel well, they don't feel comfortable, they don't feel that we care about their duties, they are very quickly resigning from the job. And we also wanted to strengthen our safety culture. The cultural aspect is really equally important as a technical part. People need to be motivated to do the job. We also, in terms of capacity building, we've enhanced our equipment and infrastructure capabilities in terms of monitoring station, in terms of computer codes, but also some mobile laboratory to perform the oversight later on. Next, please. What I've did in 2023, I've created a pre-licensing team which is responsible for preparing us to the licensing of the first NPP. Well, I was listening to my colleague in terms of you are guys having some experience. You can do things differently, where for us, it's for the first time when we're gonna perform the review. So maybe within the next 3 or 4 years, we can adopt, we can change. But nowadays, we wanted to at least get the knowledge and be agile enough to receive all the information. We'll see how it's gonna be effective later on. The pre-licensing team has more than 50 staff right now, and it's the people sitting in this team are from different departments, so it's really like a project team divided into the thematic themes or led by the project manager. We wanted to incorporate people from the whole organization because later on the same organization, the same team will work on the real submission. This way, people will know each other, they will know the flow of the information, and I see that it was a quite good idea to develop, to set up, create such a team. Next, please. Previous one, please. So what the team has achieved, we perform the comparison of the domestic and the country of origin requirements, in this case US NRC or American requirements, to see where are the differences, where are the same requirements. We are now producing the internal regulatory guides. We are developing, or the team is developing, the detailed schedule for the review. They are preparing for the TSO services procurement, all the things which might be performed before receival of the submission. And the key objective is really to develop a robust framework for review and assessment just before we will get the application. Next, please. There are some possibilities in Poland to engage with the regulator before official submission of the application. That's a pre-licensing dialogue, and I don't want to go into the details about that. There are few options that the investor can engage with the regulator. But I remember one of the first meetings with the US NRC when we were speaking about what are our needs in PAA. We said, what are the lessons learned from you guys? What we can learn? And they said, well, you have to, or you should start or engage the investor to come to you as early as possible, to start the dialogue. Because you have time to prepare yourself, but also to get the alignment in terms of understanding the requirements on both sides. And we did that. So we've issued 2 policies on these pre-licensing instruments. These are publicly available and quite widely used in Poland by the investors. Next, please. In terms of the pre-licensing dialogue with the company which is going to build AP1000, so PJ, in 2025, you can see we held 37 technical meetings. There were coordination meetings every week. There were a few meetings at the CEO level, so on my level, and the CEO of PJ. There was a platform created, IT tool that we can reach the documents provided by the PJ. We've also issued the general opinion on the circulating water system of AP1000 last year, and we've worked on a few documents which were submitted as on the pre-licensing stage, especially Chapter 4 of PSR, so we can comment on that before the application will come. So it's a very useful tool, and I would like to encourage, from my perspective, that's gonna really help the newcomer countries, and not only, I think, newcomer countries to kind of faster enhance the cooperation and the process of the licensing. But we will see it after we will perform the review. Next, please. A few words about general opinion. There are some benefits, but also drawbacks in our system. That's very beneficial to get the documents before, to be familiarized with the design. there is possibility to identify some legal obstacles or non-compliances at the early stage. But also in our case, it's a fixed price, you can see it. Time for review is maximum 9 months, and there is no possibility to issue request for additional information from our side. So it's not perfect tool, but I think it's working quite well. Next, please. And a few words about our cooperation with the US NRC as a country of origin for this design. We've performed, we developed a very detailed action plan. We have a quite well coordination among my staff and the US NRC. We use or trying to use as much as possible the experience. So we've asked NRC to host some on-the-job trainings, and you can see we've held in 2025 one on neutronic analysis, one on PSA analysis, project management for licensing. That is something which we underestimate in our planning phase. There were some national workshops, but we are continue to ask for this cooperation with the NRC, but not only, also with other regulators, just to use this opportunity that the AP1000 was already licensed in at least 2 countries. It has been reviewed also by ONR, by the GDA, so we wanted to not reinvent the wheel, but wanted to use be agile and wanted to use the experience on our partners abroad. Next, please. And with that, I hope that I was quite clear in our perspective. That was only kind of a context to foster the question and answer part. So thank you very much for listening, and hopefully you find out some nice information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrzej, and I'm glad you switched from Polish to English to help me out quite a bit. All right, moving on to Marco, please.
Well, thank you very much, Jody. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to NRC for inviting me to this panel. Fortunately, my presentation also traveled across the Atlantic, so I can switch off my computer now. I'm going to talk mainly about the approach in the Netherlands, a little bit about the approach in the European Union from my position of NSREC, like Jody mentioned, the nuclear safety regulatory authorities in the European Union that advise the European Commission. Okay, next slide, please. Here you see the member countries of the European Union in Europe, with the Netherlands, a small country with a red circle around it. It's at the seashore, remember that, I'll come back to that later. We've got the big harbor of Rotterdam there. All these EU member countries, they have signed the Euratom Treaty, and under the Euratom Treaty there are several European directives on nuclear safety, on radioactive waste, and on radiation protection, for instance. And these directives are binding for the EU member countries. They are transposed into national legislation. And in the member countries also have, on top of that, their own legislation, and the national regulators in each country are sovereign. So next slide, please. So this is a brief overview of the nuclear landscape in the Netherlands. It is quite small but very diverse. So worth mentioning here is we have one operating power plant, number 4, the Borselen nuclear power plant from the early 70s. and we are discussing currently the lifetime extension beyond 60 years of operation. We have at number one a research reactor that produces 60% of the medical isotopes used in Europe, so that's quite a big production of the medical radioisotopes. And currently at that same site, a new reactor is being built there, the Pallas reactor, to replace in some years' time the high flux reactor, also for the production of medical isotopes. So we granted the construction license for that reactor in 2023 as authority in the Netherlands, ANVS. So we're, I think, quite in a good position there because we went through the whole procedure there to issue a new license for a new reactor, and now we are learning from oversight of the building of that new reactor. We have also plans for new builds in the Netherlands. So the current government continues with the initiative that was started in 2021 with 2 governments ago. We have regular elections in the Netherlands. Hopefully this government is stable enough to have elections only in 4 years' time, but the plans for nuclear remain solid since 2021. So there is an initiative for 2 large new reactors. There will be a tender procedure at the end of this year, and it is expected that either the AP1000 of American origin or the EPR of French origin will be selected for these 2 large new builds. The government has also plans to have 2 extra power reactors, and we will see whether that will be large reactors or SMRs. Apart from the government plans, we also have initiatives from the private side in the Netherlands for SMRs. Currently, we have 2 serious initiatives on light water, 2 different light water designs, and we have initiatives for 2 different types of advanced modular reactors, one on molten salt thorium, and the other one is a sea shipping company that is developing a high temperature gas cooled pebble bed reactor for marine propulsion. And that is, as I said, we have one of the largest ports in the world, and marine propulsion seems to be an important development for us. So with all these different initiatives for SMRs, we are in an orientation phase that precedes the informal discussions on the safety issue. So it's in an early stage, but these are serious initiatives. Next slide, please. So what we did last year to prepare for this is that we completely revised our review and assessment requirements and guides. It's in one document. The Dutch abbreviation is VOBK. We had a version of 2015 that was slightly amended, but last year we completely revised it. It is a guide, but we make it mandatory for ANVS as a review and assessment document. So it has a stronger status than a guide. And we did 2 things mainly. We made it more technology neutral to allow for all developments. And we relied heavily on the IAEA safety standards that have been developed really a lot last 10 years. So next slide, please. So we made a direct reference to the IAEA safety standards and then looked which extra or specific requirements we would need in the Netherlands from the European framework, from the WENRA safety reference levels, the Western European Association of Nuclear Safety Regulators, where NRC is an observer, and some specifications from our own national framework. And we ended up with only 10 subjects where we have specific requirements. And there's an example here where the IAEA safety standards speak of practical elimination. We specify the numbers that we consider adequate. So that is how we revised that whole guide. And with me is the colleague who mainly did this. Joran, please raise your hand. So if you have any questions how to do this, ask him. Next slide, please. So for the international regulatory cooperation, very important, especially for the Netherlands with quite a small nuclear landscape. We have experience, Andrzej, but it's on a much smaller nuclear landscape than the larger programs like in the UK or in Korea. So we rely heavily on international collaboration with other regulators, and I think I would like to highlight here 2 ways of collaborating. One is to have a cooperation in early reviews on specific designs. So at the left-hand side, you see 3 SMR designs on which we, from the Netherlands, had a cooperation with other European regulators in a different fashion. For the new work we did, we are still doing this now in a 3rd phase with 7 other EU regulators. We observed what the ONR did for the generic design assessment together with 3 other European regulators, and for the molten salt thorium initiative we worked together with a French regulator. So that is very important to have a concrete design and really go into some detail and learn from these other regulators, also learning how the approaches are similar and different, and see where it comes from, how we should align, where we could align and where we have to say, okay, but this is different, so we have to take that into account. Another thing is there are a lot of international fora, of course, where regulators are collaborating on more generic level. And one that I would like to mention here is the task force on SMRs from NRCgov that I'm chairing. So what we do there is we have a dashboard on SMR initiatives that is published twice a year. And in this dashboard you can find all the initiatives of SMRs that EU regulators are engaging with, and you can see at what level of engagement that is with the national regulators, and you can see on which designs there is a cooperation between 2 or more regulators on that joint design. So that is on the NRCgov website, so you can consult that. In that task force we share lessons on these joint early designs. We also interact with the technical working group on safety of the European Industrial Alliance on SMRs for small reactors. And this task force doesn't want to duplicate the work. We want to try to see where are there issues, regulatory issues that we should further work on. And then first look is WENRA, IAEA, OECD, NEA already working on it, and then try to align with it. So my final slide is, I think, the next slide is conclusive. No, not yet. Sorry, you have to wait. Yeah, next slide, please. But there some more is following. So next slide, please. So please, there are some differences in the frameworks that we have. This could be summarized maybe with mind the gap. We have to take that into account. So I've listed here a few examples. In general, we have in the countries in the European Union more goal-based regulatory frameworks. We have more focus on optimization and continuous improvement. We have a more elaborated defense in depth philosophy in the European Union, and lower radiation dose limits for workers in the EU. And I think it's vital to understand where the differences are, because then we can more easy work together, align on where we have the same framework and see how we can cope with these differences. Next slide, please. So this is my conclusive slide. So for regulatory, international regulatory alignments is, I think, key for new reactors. The first thing I would advocate is it is vital to have a performance-based national regulatory framework based on IAEA safety standards, which is very elaborate. We made a very good study of it. It's for 95%. It covered all our needs in a regulatory framework. So we made the step to make direct reference to those safety standards from your agency, Anna. And then we can also specify very easily the differences, the specialities, and it's easier to collaborate. Joint early reviews and leveraging between regulators using previously performed reviews by other nuclear safety regulators is crucial, and this is not a binary thing, right? Leveraging, saying, okay, I can use NRC's review and assessment. We have to do that topic by topic, see whether we align in the regulatory framework and see where we have to do our assessment ourselves. And then finally, to do that, we need an open exchange of detailed information between the national regulators, of course subject to non-disclosure agreements. So sometimes there are hurdles like export controls or concerns for intellectual property. We really have to overcome that quite early in the process to have an open information exchange, and then we can fully collaborate. Thank you. That was my contribution for now, Jody.
Thank you very much, Marco. And I want to remind folks to send in any questions that you have via there's a QR code. I'll give it a moment to scan if you all have questions to send in. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Anna. Go ahead,
Thank
Anna.
you, Jody. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm coming at this topic from a little bit of a different angle. My fellow panelists have been talking about what's going on in their individual countries, and I'm here to speak about what the International Atomic Energy Agency is doing globally for this topic of advancing nuclear power programs across the world. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So for those of you that are not familiar, the IAEA is an independent United Nations agency. Our mandate is to essentially promote and enable the safe use of the atom to benefit mankind. So that's a very large scope. What I'm showing here on the screen here is my particular division. We are focused on the safety of nuclear installations, with those installations ranging from nuclear power plants to research reactors to fuel cycle facilities to small modular reactors. Any type of nuclear facility, we are assessing and developing safety standards for those facilities to help our member states maintain a high level of safety. We have about 2,500 employees. We're based in Vienna, Austria. We have 181 member states. These are essentially countries that have chosen to become members of the IAEA, and we develop consensus safety standards, as mentioned by Marco and others, that are used by I would say, the majority of our member states in their own national regulatory program. So here you can see the breakdown of my division. We have external event safety, regulatory activities, operational safety, safety assessment, and research reactor. So as I mentioned, we're really focused on the entire spectrum of facilities and the entire lifetime of those facilities, whether it's the siting stage, operation stage, construction, design, all of that. This is what we're focused on. And we can help our member states in all of these areas when they're either developing a nuclear power program, or they already have a very mature nuclear power program, but they would like an independent assessment of how their regulator or how their nuclear power plant is doing. This is something that we help our member states with. So next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about a few specific activities that we're doing to help with the safe and secure deployment of nuclear power worldwide. One of them is the Nuclear Harmonization and Standardization Initiative. We call this NESSI. This is NESSI. This came up about in 2022 was when this started, and this was, as we all know, SMRs are gaining more and more attention over the years, and so it had gained sort of a critical mass, no pun intended, a few years ago, and the head of our agency decided, okay, we're going to establish this new initiative that's really focused on harmonizing regulatory requirements for small modular reactors and advanced reactors, as well as trying to standardize the industry side of that activity. For example, how can designs be standardized to help decrease the friction when it comes to regulatory reviews? And so we decided to start this NESSI initiative. It has two tracks. It has a regulatory track, of which I am the chair, and it has an industry track, of which my fellow colleague back in Vienna in the Nuclear Energy Department is the chair. And we're both focused on increasing the harmonization and standardization of requirements and designs globally. And the idea here is to support the SMR business model, which for many of these SMR designs, they're meant to be deployed globally, not just in the country in which they're developed, but also they have business models that lead to them selling and deploying their reactors in other countries. And so how do we make that easier with less design changes while maintaining a high level of safety? So this slide shows our aspirational views of what we think NESSI can achieve. Of course, right now, 181 member states, there are 181 different ways to regulate nuclear power plants. And some of them are more similar than others. Some of them rely very heavily on the IAEA safety standards, and some of them do not. And so how can we decrease those levels of differences to make it easier for safe nuclear power plants to be deployed in multiple countries? And this is how we think we can do it. We think we can build common processes for how regulatory bodies can work together, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. We can build some trust and reliance among regulatory bodies so that when they're working together, they can do things like leverage each other's reviews and not have to re-review something that's already been determined to be safe. And then we're looking to develop a global framework for advanced reactor reviews, which I'll talk more about in a moment. So next slide, please. So I mentioned that NESSI started in 2022. This has been going on since then. Phase 1 was 2022 to 2024. And these are the main products of the regulatory track of NESSI. These 3 documents have been published in the last few months. Actually, the one in the middle was just published last week. And these are really trying to address the challenges, some of which Marco just mentioned. So the first one here on the screen talks about information sharing and how that can be a challenge when it comes to proprietary information, export controls, proprietary information. These can be real burdens to regulatory bodies working together. And what are some ideas of how those challenges can be addressed? That's contained in this document here. The second document talks about multinational pre-licensing joint regulatory reviews. How can regulatory bodies in different countries work together to assess a specific design and come to some conclusions on whether that design is safe or not? So the idea here, again, is that they work together, they leverage each other's resources, and come to common findings that can then be used in the licensing process back in their own countries. And then leveraging and collaboration. This is when one regulator wants to use the previously completed review from another regulator. So for example, the US NRC finished their design certification of NuScale, and perhaps there's another country that now NuScale is going to see if they could be licensed in, and perhaps that regulatory body could rely on the review done by the US NRC and not re-review everything that's already been done. So that's the idea here. And all of these are discussed in these documents. These documents were developed along with the regulatory bodies of many of our member states. For each one, there was typically probably 25 or 30 regulatory bodies involved. So these are not the output of 1 or 2 regulatory bodies who think we should do it this way, but rather a pretty large number that concluded that this is ways we can go about increasing regulatory harmonization across the globe. So the next slide, please. So that was the outputs of phase 1 of NSSC. Now we're in phase 2. We decided to continue because our member states found it very useful and thought there was some more work we could still do. So these are the 5 activities being done under NSSC phase 2. The first one and the second one that you see here, the red and the purple, they're related. It's about regulators working together, sharing information. The toolkit, for example, has a questionnaire that a regulator can go through to decide if they can rely on another regulator's review for the work that they're doing. So some practical tools that they can use when looking to leverage information from another regulator. The Regulation and Cooperation Hub is going to be a gathering point for conclusions of regulatory reviews that have been done, lessons learned, best practices, and so regulators can go there and learn from the reviews of what other countries have done. The third one there is pilot implementation of the NSSC phase 1 process, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. The green block is a security working group. So the first phase of NSSC was based only on safety, but we heard from our member states that they would also like some focus on security for SMRs and advanced reactors. So that's what this group is doing now. We have about 20 or 25 of our member states are involved in this group, and they're doing things like looking at security by design. How do you incorporate security into the very early stages of your design? So that group is working now. And then the last one is the Global Framework for Advanced Reactor Reviews, or GFAR, which I will talk about on the next slide, please. So the GFAR, this is another step in the process of trying to achieve global regulatory harmonization, which we all know is a huge and perhaps unachievable task for all countries to regulate in the exact same way. But we think we can make progress in this direction. We think it can be improved from the current situation without reducing the level of safety or security for these designs. And that's one thing that GFAR looks to do. It's going to be, what is it actually in practice? It's going to be what we call a safety report, and it's going to look at 2 different aspects. One is the review pathways. What are different ways that regulators can work together? And then technical aspects, and this is the new part of this. That's that what NSSC previously has not addressed. What are the technical aspects of a review for an advanced reactor that regulatory bodies should look at and come to common conclusions if they want to be able to achieve regulatory harmonization? These are sort of the most important parts of the reactor, such as the core design or the engineered safety systems. Those types of very important systems would be looked at here. And so this document, we're hoping to complete it in 2028, and then it would be implemented, and we would learn some lessons and feed it back into the process. So if we can go to the next slide. This talks about what we think the advantages are for both the regulators and the developers when it comes to GFAR. Of course, we believe would result in a more efficient use of resources for regulatory bodies. It would allow access to global expertise that perhaps some regulatory bodies do not have, especially those that are smaller or those that are in embarking countries. It would strengthen international cooperation and sort of the global nuclear safety regime, and increase the harmonization and increase public confidence. For the developers, we think that the benefits that would apply to them is that if you go through the GFAR process, you would increase the possibility that your design would be found acceptable in multiple countries and not just one. We think this gives a credible path towards full compliance when it's being licensed in the national jurisdiction, and also lead to cost savings. We know that developers, it's very expensive if you have to change your design every time you go to another country because the requirements are different. So if there's a way we can reduce the likelihood of design changes, that's a benefit for the developer. And then we think that will help with market access and as well with improved public confidence. So next slide, please. I mentioned one thing we wanted to do in phase 2 is an application of the processes that we developed in phase 1, these regulatory cooperation processes. And what we needed someone to do was to step forward and say, yes, we want to be the pilot project. And that pilot project here is the Eagles 300. So this is 3 countries that are interested in a lead-cooled reactor. It's Belgium and Romania. They have development activities going on with respect to lead-cooled reactors. They wanted to work together to save resources and learn from each other. And so they came to the IAEA and asked if they could use the process that I mentioned in that second document on the NSSC slide about international pre-licensing joint regulatory reviews. So they want to work together. They asked the IAEA to come in. We're sort of like the project manager here. We set out the timelines and the milestones, and we organize the meetings, and we suggest the technical areas that need to be covered, and help the review stay on track. So the idea is that these two regulators, as well as Italy, who is an observer because they also have some interest in the lead-cooled reactor, are working together through this process. The output will be a report that talks about the findings of these regulators, what they think is licensable about this design, what the designer might need to go back and look at again. And so this will give the developer feedback from 2 or perhaps 3 regulators at once. So it's a benefit for all of the parties involved. We're very excited about this project. If we could go to the next slide. You can just see some pictures here of this was the signings of all the various arrangements that are needed, all the MOUs and information sharing and budget arrangements and all of that. It was all signed at our general conference in September 2025, and since then it's really been kicked off, and we're starting to move now into the technical areas of this review. So next slide, please. Another service that we give is peer reviews, where we, the IAEA, upon the request of various developers or countries, will gather teams of experts from around the world and come and look at, for example, at your SMR design and give you feedback on how well it does or does not meet the IAEA safety standards. And this is a good tool for seeing if you meet the safety standards, but also to see how likely it is that a particular design would be able to be licensed in a country. But let me move on to the next topic, which I think might be of interest. This is my last topic. We could go to the next slide. It's been mentioned a couple times, atomic technologies licensed for applications at sea. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, okay, thank you. So here we're looking at the use of nuclear technologies for propulsion of civil ships. So this is for peaceful use. I'm not talking about military use at all, but the use of SMRs, essentially, for propulsion of large cargo ships, for example, or the other thing included in the scope of Atlas is floating nuclear power plants. So, for example, Russia right now has a floating nuclear power plant that's up at its northern border, where they built it somewhere else. They sailed it around to where it is they needed the power. Put down the anchor there, hooked up the SMR that's on the barge to the facilities on the land, and now they're getting the electricity from that floating nuclear power plant. But there's a lot of challenges involved in this, as you can imagine. And so our Director General decided to start this new initiative. It's intended to create a framework that promotes and supports the safe and secure development and this particular application of nuclear technologies. So next slide, please. So we're looking to put this together. One thing we usually do at the beginning of a project is a terms of reference. What a terms of reference does is explain the goals of the project, how it's going to work, who is involved, what the timelines are. We're developing that now internally. We're working with our sister United Nations organization, the International Maritime Organization, because they're in charge of safety of ships, essentially. So of course we need to work very closely with them. We're having bilateral discussions with a lot of our member states to understand how we can best support them in this application of nuclear technology. And we're hoping to have a launch event on this later this year at a port facility here in the United States, but the details on that are yet to come. So I think that's it for me. Thank you. Thanks, Jody. Happy to answer any questions.
I want to thank all of our presenters. It was we provided hopefully a lot of helpful information to all of you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for questions, but I want to thank I think everyone gave very informative presentations. So I thank you very much for coming and presenting. Can we give one more round of applause to all the presenters today? And hopefully, if they're willing, if you all run into them for the next 2 days of the RIC, people will be happy to answer questions. I'm happy to answer any questions if you see me in the hallways. So hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening, and the first plenary session is tomorrow morning at 8:30. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.